On the night of October 31st, 1993, a 23-year-old actor stumbled out of the Viper Room on Sunset Boulevard, his skin turning pale, his body collapsing onto the pavement, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Behind him, the neon lights of Los Angeles flickered like a dying heartbeat. Crowds screamed. A girl cried for help, and a familiar voice trembled as it dialed 911. It was Joaquin Phoenix, the younger brother who would later become one of the greatest actors of his generation. For years, the world was told a simple story: drug overdose. A tragedy, yes, but a clean explanation. Convenient, quick, easily swallowed by the public. Except, nothing about that night was clean, not the timeline, not the witnesses, not the toxicology report, not the desperate attempt to protect the club's owner, Johnny Depp, and certainly not the contradictions buried inside the police files. People who were there that night changed their stories. Others disappeared from the record entirely. The authorities released only what they wanted the world to see, and Hollywood, as always, moved on. But there is one truth that refuses to fade. River Phoenix was not a reckless addict. He was a gentle soul, a quiet genius, whose life ended in a place he should never have been, surrounded by people he should never have trusted. The cameras captured only his fall, but they never captured the forces that pushed him toward it. And what happened in those final 90 minutes? The world thinks it knows. It doesn't. This is the part of River Phoenix's story Hollywood hoped you would forget. River Jude Phoenix was born on August 23, 1970 in Madras, Oregon, a remote, dusty stretch of land where dreams rarely survive long enough to become real. His parents, Arlen and John Phoenix, were wandering idealists, drifting from town to town with nothing but guitars, notebooks, and a belief that art could heal the world. They lived in cars, tents, small apartments, anything they could afford at the moment. There were no steady paychecks, no safety nets, and often not enough food. River was the oldest of 5 children. He learned responsibility before he learned comfort. He learned hunger before he learned fame. When he was still a child, the family moved to South America as part of a controversial spiritual group. Life there was harsher than anything he had known. The days were humid and heavy, filled with labor and uncertainty. River spent hours playing his guitar beneath makeshift wooden roofs, singing to drown out the weight of survival. Those early melodies, raw, untrained, honest, became the first sign that this boy was different. By 1977, the Phoenix family returned to the United States, broke and exhausted. They arrived in Los Angeles with no money, no contacts, and no plan except one: the children would perform. River, at just 7 years old, was already captivating. He sang on street corners and at supermarket entrances, his voice bright enough to make strangers stop in mid-step. People gave money not out of pity, but because they felt they had seen a spark of something rare, something too big for a sidewalk. That spark soon drew the attention of Hollywood. A small talent agency approached the family after seeing River and his siblings perform. Casting directors were struck by his presence. He didn't act like a child trying to impress adults. He acted like a soul too old for his own body. He carried sadness and hope in equal measure, and both could be seen the moment he entered a room. In 1982, River landed his first television roles. Within months, he was booking more auditions than actors twice his age. Directors described him as naturally cinematic. He didn't need rehearsals. He didn't need guidance. He understood emotions instinctively, as if they lived beneath his skin. But River's world was never simple. Behind the auditions and the applause, the Phoenix family still battled poverty. They lived in small apartments with secondhand furniture and inconsistent electricity. River would shoot a TV scene during the day and return home at night to a refrigerator that hummed with emptiness. He shared everything he earned with his siblings, making sure they had food before he ever bought anything for himself. Those early years shaped him into something Hollywood rarely encounters: a prodigy untouched by ego, a rising star who remained painfully grounded, a child actor who never acted like a child. And as he entered his teenage years, it became clear that he was not just talented. He was extraordinary. His breakout moment came in 1986 with Stand By Me. At only 15, River delivered a performance so raw and honest that critics compared him to a young James Dean. Audiences felt something new, a kind of vulnerability that made them protective of him, almost afraid for him. He wasn't just playing characters. He was revealing pieces of himself. Hollywood had never seen anyone like him, and as the world was about to discover, brilliance like his always comes with a cost. In 1986, everything changed. Stand By Me premiered and instantly became a cultural phenomenon. River Phoenix, just 15 years old, delivered a performance that felt less like acting and more like confession. The industry took notice. The audience fell in love. And Hollywood, always hungry for the next myth, had found its newest obsession. By 1988, River was no longer a promising newcomer. He was the face of a new generation of actors. That year, he starred in Running on Empty, a film that demanded emotional depth far beyond his age. The performance was so authentic, so quietly devastating, that the Academy nominated him for Best Supporting Actor. At 18, he was the fifth youngest nominee in the category's history. It was the kind of rise most actors chase for decades. River achieved it before he was even old enough to drink. In the late 1980s, Hollywood transformed around him. Action stars dominated the box office. Studio executives wanted muscle, danger, spectacle. But River brought something entirely different: softness, fragility, an ability to expose the inner wounds of a character without ever raising his voice. He made vulnerability cinematic. In 1989, he was cast in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, playing the young version of Harrison Ford's iconic character. The film became a global blockbuster, and for the first time, River felt the weight of international fame pressing against him. Paparazzi began following him. Magazines published spreads calling him the new James Dean, and producers competed to sign him to multi-picture deals worth more than anything he had ever imagined. But River didn't want fame. He wanted meaning. While actors his age chased mainstream stardom, River chased the truth inside complicated roles. He turned down major studio projects and chose smaller, riskier films that allowed him to stretch his craft. He hated the idea of being a product. That decision led him to the role that would define his legacy. In 1991, River starred in Gus Van Sant's My Own Private Idaho, opposite Keanu Reeves. The production was unconventional, the script experimental, the subject matter controversial, but the result was a masterpiece. River's performance as Mike Waters, a homeless young man grappling with longing, identity, and abandonment, became one of the most celebrated in independent film history. Critics wrote that he had rewritten the possibilities of screen acting. Directors called him a once-in-a-generation talent. Keanu Reeves later said, "River had a soul you don't meet twice in one lifetime." But success brought shadows. Throughout these years, River was overworked, underprotected, and desperately trying to balance his rising fame with the quiet moral code he grew up with. He avoided the Hollywood party scene, yet Hollywood kept pushing it toward him. He kept his lifestyle clean, yet people around him didn't. He tried to remain grounded, yet the industry around him thrived on chaos. By 1992, the pressure was showing. River struggled to maintain the purity he valued while living in an environment built on excess. He became increasingly withdrawn, spending more time writing music, playing guitar, and trying to escape the noise that followed him everywhere. Hollywood wanted him to become the next global superstar. River wanted to disappear into the art itself. And as the gap between what he wanted and what the industry demanded grew wider, the cracks in his world began to show. The boy who once sang on street corners was now standing at the edge of something darker, something he couldn't fully escape, and the night that would change everything was getting closer. But fame doesn't last, and innocence doesn't survive Hollywood. By 1993, River Phoenix was exhausted. The pressure of carrying a generation's hopes on his shoulders had worn him thin. He had just finished shooting Dark Blood, a demanding production that left him physically drained and emotionally brittle. Those close to him noticed he was quieter than usual, tense and struggling to keep his balance between the person he was and the star everyone expected him to be. On the night of October 30th, 1993, River arrived in Los Angeles after weeks of filming in Utah. He barely slept. He barely ate. Less than 24 hours later, it would all be over. October 31st began like any other night on the Sunset Strip. Music pulsed from clubs. Cars rolled down the boulevard. The air smelled of perfume, sweat, and gasoline. River and his siblings, Joaquin and Rain, headed to the Viper Room, a nightclub partially owned by Johnny Depp, known for its dark velvet walls, its late-night secrecy, and its reputation as a haven for Hollywood's elite. Inside the club, the atmosphere was chaotic. A private room, dimly lit, overflowed with musicians, actors, and hangers-on. A band played on stage. Drinks circulated freely, and somewhere between the laughter and the noise, River consumed something, a liquid or a powder, that witnesses later described with unsettling vagueness. At 1 a.m., he was visibly shaking. By 1 to 10 a.m., he stumbled out of the club, collapsing onto the sidewalk. The timeline from this point is one of the most disputed sequences in Hollywood history. Some said River had been given a potent cocktail mixed without his knowledge. Others claimed he drank from a cup handed to him by someone he barely knew. A few insisted he was already in distress inside the club, while people kept playing music as if nothing were happening. But the most chilling detail came from Joaquin Phoenix's frantic 911 call. His voice cracked, trembling, begging for help. He told the dispatcher his brother was convulsing. He repeated that he didn't know what River had taken. Meanwhile, outside the Viper Room, a small crowd gathered. Rain Phoenix knelt beside her brother, trying to steady his breathing. Joaquin shouted at bystanders who were staring instead of helping. Someone placed a jacket under River's head. Someone else cried uncontrollably. The streetlights cast long, cold shadows over the scene. Inside the club, the music didn't stop. Most people had no idea what was happening outside. Others knew, and chose silence. When paramedics arrived, River was unresponsive. They attempted resuscitation on the sidewalk, then rushed him to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Despite their efforts, River was pronounced dead at 1:51 a.m. The news hit Hollywood like a shockwave, but what came next was stranger than the tragedy itself. Within hours, major outlets published the same narrative: overdose, drugs, addiction, a tidy explanation, a convenient headline, the kind of story that allowed the industry to distance itself from the uncomfortable truth that a young man had died at their doorstep. Yet several details refused to align. Witnesses contradicted each other. The official toxicology report took an unusually long time to release. Early police notes disappeared from later summaries. Johnny Depp refrained from discussing the incident for decades, and multiple insiders insisted River had been clean and cautious. Nothing like the reckless addict the press painted. Hollywood moved on. The club reopened the next day. Career obligations resumed. Producers scrambled to complete Dark Blood without him. But for those who loved River, the world had changed forever. The gentle boy from Oregon, the child who sang for food, the teenager who redefined screen acting, the young man who avoided the excesses of Hollywood, had died on a sidewalk, in public, under circumstances that never fully made sense. And in that moment, the myth of River Phoenix was born. Not the myth of a fallen star, but the myth of a life stolen by a night that never should have happened. The morning after River Phoenix died, Los Angeles felt strangely quiet. The Sunset Strip, normally throbbing with noise, seemed muted, as if the city itself were trying to absorb what had happened just hours earlier. Newspapers were already printing headlines that reduced a brilliant life to a single word: overdose. It was the fastest, simplest narrative, and Hollywood embraced it without hesitation. But the people who truly knew River, his family, his closest friends, the actors who had worked beside him, refused that version of events. They insisted he wasn't a cautionary tale. He wasn't a statistic. He wasn't the person the tabloids described. They knew the truth was far more complicated and far more tragic. River's family retreated from public view almost immediately. His mother, Arlen, released a written statement calling him a bright light, a gentle spirit, and a gift to the world. But beyond that, they chose silence, not out of shame, but out of protection. They understood that grief becomes spectacle in Hollywood, and they were determined not to let River's memory be consumed a second time. Joaquin Phoenix, just 19 years old, disappeared from the spotlight. For months, he avoided cameras, interviews, and public appearances. He carried the trauma of that night with him, the sound of his own voice on the 911 recording haunting him long after the world forgot about it. Friends described him as lost, drifting, and shattered. But slowly, painfully slowly, he redirected his grief into something else: acting. Years later, Joaquin would say that his career was a continuation of the path River couldn't finish. Keanu Reeves also retreated into silence. He carried deep guilt over the loss of his closest friend, the person he had trusted more than anyone else in the industry. For nearly 30 years, Keanu kept a photograph of River folded inside his wallet, a private memorial he never showed the world, only admitting its existence decades later. Johnny Depp, owner of the Viper Room, locked himself behind the kind of silence that invites questions rather than answers. He refused interviews about that night. He declined to clarify rumors. He made no attempts to reshape the narrative. In the years that followed, the Viper Room became a symbol, not of nightlife, but of a wound Hollywood never wanted to reopen. By the time the club was demolished in 2023, it had become a relic of a tragedy people still whispered about, but rarely discussed openly. Meanwhile, film studios scrambled to salvage Dark Blood, the project River left unfinished. For nearly 2 decades, the footage was locked away, too painful and too incomplete to release. It wasn't until 2012, 19 years after his death, that director George Sluizer assembled a final cut, using narration to fill in the scenes River never had the chance to shoot. Watching it felt like watching a ghost return to the screen, a final reminder of the brilliance Hollywood lost too soon. The industry didn't just lose a star, it lost a future that never came. Directors who had planned multi-film collaborations with River rewrote their careers. Roles that were meant for him were recast, sometimes won by actors who openly admitted they owed their success to the path he left behind. Leonardo DiCaprio famously said that he never auditioned for This Boy's Life until River's death created an unexpected vacancy. Hollywood would be different if River Phoenix was still alive, he once stated. It wasn't flattery, it was truth. But perhaps the most profound legacy was the quiet shift that occurred within the industry. River's death forced Hollywood to confront, at least for a moment, the dangerous culture it had built around its young talent. The long nights, the clubs, the crowds, the pressure, the complete lack of protection. Some actors inspired by River's story began drawing firmer boundaries. Others reconsidered the cost of fame. And then there was the public, the millions who had grown up watching him. For them, River became something rare, a symbol of purity in a place known for devouring innocence. His death ignited a wave of tribute songs, murals, magazine features, and documentaries created not out of morbid curiosity, but out of genuine loss. River's absence became a presence, a reminder etched into the culture of Hollywood, a question that never fully found its answer. In the decades that followed, he became more than an actor who died too young. He became a myth, a ghost who shaped careers, inspired performances, and lingered in the stories of those who knew him. His life was brief, but the imprint he left was permanent. And while he never lived long enough to see the world change, his legacy changed the lives of those who survived him. Hollywood forgets fast. It buries its tragedies beneath new premieres, new scandals, new names. But every once in a generation, a story refuses to disappear. River Phoenix is one of those stories. He lived only 23 years, years shaped by hunger, hope, brilliance, and unbearable pressure. Yet his influence stretches far beyond the roles he left behind. You can trace it in Joaquin Phoenix's ferocity on screen. You can see it in Keanu Reeves's quiet humility. You can hear it in the way directors speak about the actor they still wish they could have worked with. Even decades later, River remains the standard by which young performers measure honesty. His photographs from the late 80s and early 90s now feel prophetic. The soft eyes, the guarded smile, the sense that he was already carrying more than he ever said out loud. He looked like someone the world should have protected. And it didn't. But his legacy is not the sidewalk outside the Viper Room. It is not the headlines. It is not the myths. His true legacy is something quieter. It is the unfinished melody of a musician who cared more about art than fame. It is the gentleness he showed in a place that rewarded cruelty. It is the possibility of a career that might have changed Hollywood forever. There is a photograph taken on a film set in 1991 where River is sitting alone in the desert dirt, guitar in hand, sunlight burning through his hair. He isn't posing. He isn't performing. He is simply being. It is the closest the world ever came to seeing him without the noise. That image remains. A boy, a guitar, and a horizon he never reached. A reminder that some stars don't fade. They are taken suddenly, leaving the sky permanently changed. River Phoenix didn't live long, but he lived bright, and Hollywood has been dimmer ever since.